In these two workshops, you have the opportunity to participate from a student perspective and also think critically from a teacher perspective. And you get to see the entire unit through. You get to start with a phenomenon, you get to notice and wonder, you get to come up with questions that you want to answer via investigations, and you get to do those investigations the same way that your kids would be doing in the classroom. You really get the full experience of a unit of study from both the student's point of view and the teacher's point of view. Plus, you also understand how literacy is extremely important and intertwined with science instruction.
Let's start off with, what's the name of your workshop and what's it about? Give me a little brief summary on what is this workshop about.
It's fun. First of all, people should come to us because it's going to be fun.
Yeah, speaking of fun, one of the things that we really want our participants to do is play in student mode. One of the ways that we've been referring to the first session is playing and learning, capturing student interest with phenomena, because we really want our participants in student mode to experience this free exploration that they would have their students do in the classroom in order to better understand a scientific concept.
And when teachers wear student hat, they often are uncomfortable, but they often are the first ones to, at the end, have that huge aha. Oh, this makes perfect sense. Why this lesson flopped, or it was wonderful, right? And I think that the more we can help teachers reflect in that manner, the better it'll be. Unfortunately, teachers are very busy creatures, and it's very difficult for them to take the time. So this is an opportunity for them to really think about themselves and their practice and bask in the glory of their work.
So the name of the workshop is Text to Support Quality Science Instruction.
We changed it up a little bit.
Okay.
So as we were doing our planning, we determined that while texts are important to the first part of the workshop, what's really important when we get down to brass tacks is phenomena. And understanding what phenomena are, that phenomena don't have to be phenomenal, and that they can act as really great springboards for a unit of study. So we actually changed that to capturing student interest with phenomena. But then our second session will focus on texts. We're calling that using texts and other media to support quality science instruction. So first we're focusing on phenomena, then we'll focus on supporting learning with texts.
So maybe we should show some of the toys. I was going to say, could show my screen and then show some of the toys that we're going to use, and we're actually going to play with toys. So
sure. Before we get to that, though, which I want to say, for the uneducated ones of us, define phenomenon in the concept that how you want to use it.
A phenomena is an observable event that happens in the world anywhere that can be figured out and used, predict, explain, make sense of the world around them, right? It can be as simple as going outside on a cold morning and seeing your breath. When you do that and you see the cold, I used to use that as a temperature check. I think about, or it could be the leaves changing on the tree, or the fact that lots of trees out here that are still green, but there's lots of trees out here when I look around that have no leaves. So anyway, it can be exciting as toys, which we're going to include, or it can be just something that you see every single day and you just don't think about.
So how did you guys come to build this workshop? What was the inspiration behind it?
Kathy has been in several of my workshops, and I also closely follow the professional work that Kathy's been doing. And I know that Kathy has had a focus recently on literacy and science and how they're not mutually exclusive and depend on one another in the classroom. We thought that would be a really good focus for a STEM Teachers New York City workshop, because we haven't had a workshop that was specifically devoted to understanding how literacy plays a role in science instruction and science understanding.
And having said that, is what we soon discovered was we couldn't do it without starting with the phenomena, right? We couldn't do what we wanted to do because the message we want to send is, yes, literacy really is mutually interdependent, but I don't want it to be all about reading. It's not all about reading. It's about doing the science and engaging with the science. So the books that we will use will support it. But even in our first workshop, they will be writing. They will be speaking and listening to each other. We are using literacy in that first workshop. It's just part of what we need, what we're doing but it couldn't happen. We couldn't make it work for us because of what we really know about learning science now. We couldn't do just the literacy piece. It just did not work.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were mentioning the tools that you were going to use during the workshop. Why don't you give me a brief little description on what participants will be doing inside your workshop and how it'll affect their everyday school kind of life?
Yeah, so we mentioned that participants would be playing. We are actually going to split participants up into 2 grade band groups. So we'll have people who want to focus on grades K through 2 and people who want to focus on grades 3 through 5. And if you're in the K to 2 grade band, you're going to have the opportunity to play with a tuning fork. And if you're in the 3 to 5 grade band, you're going to be able to play with this really awesome tool called an energy stick, both of which are really fun to explore. And we'll be using those to have participants refer back to when they're modeling and explaining their understanding of a concept.
And they are going to play with them. In the first 5 minutes, they're going to play with them.
And how will that translate to their students?
I think it's really important for our teacher participants to experience what their students would experience in an effective classroom setting. And so it's important for teachers to understand that just playing and doing an open exploration and just having a free play moment is okay. Like it might not seem right away that's what we want to provide our students with, but when you think about it, it's this play and exploration that's really going to bring them to a deeper understanding of what we want them to know.
Because we're going to have them notice and wonder, right? We
Exactly.
want them, so they play, then, okay, now let's take a few minutes and let's look at these things. How do they work? What's going on? So what did you notice as you played, as you spent all that time playing with them? What were some of the things you noticed? What do you wonder about? What questions do you have after this? And then going into, okay, so let's make a model. How do we think this works? And carry that. So I think what we're really doing is we're using these devices to explain this really cool pedagogy, this way of teaching. So I think that really that's what's happening is, yes, there's science content involved, and that's really important, but it's the pedagogy and what we're trying to convey is the way of this different way of instruction. No more standing up there and telling them everything, basically, or having them read directly from the textbook is the intent of this.
Do you have an example that you've used this in your own personal classroom, this style of teaching?
Yes, I've used it with kids. I've used it with adults. Yeah, I have pictures from using it with adults. You should see what teachers look like when they're playing with the energy stick.
I've used the energy sticks and tuning forks in my own classroom to support instruction about transfer of energy. And a lot of times, interestingly, students, especially the younger students, have never seen a tuning fork before. So the novelty of it is just really exciting, even before you get to the fact that, oh, wow, I can hit it and it makes sound. And the energy sticks are, I think, fun for anybody.
And I think there's still the wow factor.
Totally.
I think it's not something that kids see all the time. So
Can you define an energy stick for me? What's an energy stick?
It's a tube with wires and a battery that lights up and buzzes. And there's probably, I know there's a video of one somewhere because I've actually put one together, but literally, so when you make when you make the connections, right? When it's a circuit, it does all these things and it makes all this noise, right? So you've got 20 kids and you got 10 energy sticks and they're all going at different. And what soon happens is once they start to figure things out, they then automatically move to doing things like, could two of us do this? Can we do it with two? There are so many, it just builds, the excitement builds and the curiosity builds. Like, will it light if I stick it up next to my desk? Will it light? All of those things, kinds of things.
That sounds very interesting.
One of the drawbacks, I think if for that particular tool or any tool right now is it's actually, they used to be $8, they're $10 now. So the drawback, I think, is the cost. But still, when you think about if you have even 30 kids in your classroom, 15 of them, it's $150. There's ways to do it. That's all.
Where do you purchase these energy sticks? Just wondering.
I got mine from Amazon, but
Yeah, you can easily get them on Amazon. I know that Steve Spangler, he has his name on at least some of the energy sticks.
and I don't know that he wasn't the original, but I think
Right.
he got really involved in it. I'm trying to think where I don't know where I first saw it. It was something when I was teaching in Vermont, I actually used, and I really began using it with teachers because I discovered how much teachers really liked it, doing it. So that was one of the things that happened. Yeah. Another thing that I've used that shows my age, but is a Woolly Willy
Yeah.
for magnets and non-contact force. But people, first of all, they're getting harder to find, and fuzzy faces now they're called. But anyway, you can do so any of those kinds of things. But the tuning fork is the same thing. I don't have any idea what a tuning fork costs these days.
So after the participants first of all, do they have to go to both workshops or could they go individual?
I think they should go to both because they really do build on each other. The second one really builds on what we do in the first session. And I think that the context of the first session is going to be important to understanding where we go with the second session.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Because the other thing is, so this is only part of what we're doing. They're actually going to be able to do something with this. Eventually they'll get from the electricity piece, they'll get to making circuits themselves using squishy circuits. So maybe they can't afford the energy sticks, but maybe they could build this squishy circuit or something, or show a video of a squishy circuit and ask and do the same thing, right? And those materials are much more manageable. All right. So they could use the squishy circuit as their phenomena, or they could use it in the way we're using it, which is a way to investigate that particular phenomena. Like, how do we use that squishy circuit? When we make the squishy circuit, how does this help us explain what's going on in the phenomena that we chose to use? Because that's the big thing, right? Is figuring out what's making that energy stick work, or figuring out why that tuning fork works the way it does. That's the intent in terms of the science content, right? Is thinking about that process. How are we figuring all of that out?
So at the end of the workshop, once they've taken part 1 and part 2, what would you like the participant to come out of the workshop with?
I personally would like them to understand what a coherent unit of study looks like, sounds, feels. I want them to understand how they can use phenomena as jumping off points for learning content. And I want them to understand that phenomena don't have to be phenomenal. Sometimes they can be really simple. I saw a puddle yesterday and the puddle is gone today. Where did it go? That could be enough to have so many different questions and wonderings about. So I also, in addition to that, really want in the second session for them to understand how the literacy is intertwined with the science instruction and science investigation. So when are we reading, when are we using media, when are we writing? All of those things are happening throughout the course of a unit. And why is that important?
And I'm just going to build a little bit on that. One of the things that I think is really important is I want them to understand that how their students' interest and identity can help them make their instruction sticky, make it meaningful, make it relevant. So that there's that piece. And the other thing, along with what Juliette was saying about the literacy pieces of it, one of the forgotten pieces of literacy is the speaking and listening. So one of the things I've highlighted is to think about the fact that any conversations we're having, you're not only doing science, you're doing language arts, and you could be assessing your student in speaking and listening while you're listening to them explain how that tuning fork works. So we know as elementary educators that time is a huge issue in terms of science instruction or social studies, whatever, but it really is a huge issue. So maybe hopefully by some of what we're doing, we can help them see it's okay to use some of that literacy time as science time, because it really is mutually dependent and you're doing both. So I'm not too passionate about any of this.
Yeah, just a little bit, just a little bit. All right, so capturing that passion, you're in an elevator with 5 other teachers, elementary teachers, by the way, and you got 30 seconds to tell them why they should join your workshop. Why should I participate in these 2 workshops?
I would say in this series of workshops, in these 2 workshops, you have the opportunity to participate from a student perspective and also think critically from a teacher perspective. And you get to see the entire unit through. You get to start with a phenomenon, you get to notice and wonder, you get to come up with questions that you want to answer via investigations, and you get to do those investigations the same way that your kids would be doing in the classroom. You really get the full experience of a unit of study from both the student's point of view and the teacher's point of view. Plus, you also understand how literacy is extremely important and intertwined with science instruction.
I'm going to show you how you can do science during your literacy time and have it really be accessible, that you can literally take your standards and look at it and make it work. I'm going to show you how your kids are going to improve in their reading and writing because they're interested in what they're reading and writing about. These 2 workshops are really going to be fun and you're going to enjoy them. You as an adult learner are going to be just as engaged as your students would be.
It's very good. I'm interested. Something you actually brought up, which I find fascinating, which I think would be interesting to explore a little bit more on, is the intertwined literacy and science. How you can turn one type of lesson into an encompassing type of lesson. And I guess that's more focused on elementary because elementary is different than what high school. No, it's actually not. So tell me about that relationship. Tell me how it can be explored a little bit more.
I think, first of all, I think what we're talking about is K forever, pre-K forever, right? As adults. So second, and in high school, that's definitely not the way we learned. Any of us have learned. Currently, there is a shift towards this movement. So the same pedagogy I was talking to you about, which isn't answering your question, I'm realizing I've gone off on a tangent, that to change the way high school science classes are involved and to make them much more like what we're talking about. Yes, with much more complexity than what we're talking about. They're talking about much larger issues from climate change to whatever. But anyway, now I'll try to go back to Juliette. Let me think for a minute. You can take over a little bit. Maybe you can answer his questions.
So the question was, why is literacy so important in science instruction?
Just that relationship, because again, as a layman, when I think of science, I think of science. When I think of language arts, I think of language arts. When I think of social studies, I think of social studies. I don't necessarily think of them all at the same time, but shouldn't. But why can't you think of all of them at the same time? So that kind of relationship you guys are describing.
Yeah, and when we're in the classroom, we like to refer to actual scientists and what actual scientists are doing in the field. And so much of what they do is reading and writing.
To each other.
Exactly. And conveying information verbally. I think that students sometimes don't think about that perspective when they're thinking about scientific work, and communicating verbally using language is a huge, important part of being part of the scientific community and communicating with other people in the scientific community.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. That's exactly where I was going. Thinking like the scientist is what I try to say a lot. One of the things I was thinking about too, as she was saying it, is, and I hadn't thought about this, is there are so many books out now that are, I think there's one on Sylvia Earle, but there's a whole field, can't think about the journey, but it's the Scientist in the Field kind of series, which really talks about the things that a scientist of that type, if they're an oceanographer, if they're this, if they're that, what they actually would do, and things, and then going back to even somebody like Jane Goodall, who spent hours just literally sitting with her notebooks and observing, right? Hours, days. And that's all part of the science. And so she was writing, she was watching and writing.
I want to say thank you very much for spending this 25 minutes with me and describing and telling me about your workshop.